Welcome to the debate. So, imagine walking into a completely dark room. You've never been there before,
Sounds a bit intimidating.
right? And you want to describe what's inside to someone else. But to do that, you first need to find the light switch. Now, in second language acquisition, particularly for adults, I would argue that switch is structural grammar. It illuminates the underlying mechanics of the language so you can, actually see what you are doing.
Well, sure, but look at the cost of trying to wire the entire room before you even speak. I mean, if you were in that dark room, you don't need a comprehensive electrical grid just to navigate. You just need a flashlight.
A flashlight?
Yeah, a few prepackaged, ready-to-use beams of light, what linguists call lexical chunks. Those let you interact and communicate immediately without all the heavy lifting.
And that is the exact divide we are tackling today. If you are teaching an adult English for the very first time, specifically, how to introduce themselves, state their origin, and share their age, do you wire the grammar first, or do you hand them that flashlight of memorized phrases?
The classic dilemma.
Exactly. I will argue that structural mastery of the foundational verb to be is an indispensable engine of English introductions. Honestly, without that blueprint, communication just collapses.
And I will argue that focusing on the blueprint actually paralyzes the learner. Memorizing lexical chunks, prioritizing the practical pronunciation of countries and nationalities, and engaging in realistic role-play, that is the true catalyst for fluency. The curriculum we are analyzing today offers these two very distinct maps for the territory.
Let's examine the mechanics of what happens when a beginner attempts their very first introduction. The text illustrates this fascinating phenomena known as L1 interference, or, first language transfer. Adult learners don't arrive as blank slates.
No, they definitely don't.
They bring the heavily entrenched syntax of their native language. A Portuguese or Spanish speaker's immediate neurolinguistic instinct is to express age using the verb to have. They inherently want to say, I have 20 years, right? Because they are mapping their native syntax directly onto English vocabulary.
Right, the direct translation trap. It's so common.
It really is. But the correct English form is I am 20 years old. Now, this isn't just a simple vocabulary swap. It is a profound conceptual shift. It requires the learner to understand that English treats age as a state of being, not a possession.
Okay, I follow that.
So this proves that without mastering the highly irregular verb to be and understanding its function as a copular verb that links subjects to states, even the most basic demographic information cannot be conveyed. If you don't confront the structural reality that English merges what Romance languages separate into ser and estar, well, you are building on a fractured foundation.
I'll grant you that the conceptual shift from possession to state of being is linguistically interesting. But, I think you're sacrificing long-term fluency for short-term pedantry here. You're assuming second language acquisition is primarily an intellectual, analytical exercise.
Well, it certainly involves analysis.
But it's not primarily that. It's a behavioral and social exercise. When we look at the methodology advocating for lexical chunks, it's designed specifically to bypass the massive cognitive load of metagrammar.
But cognitive load is inevitable. You can't just ignore syntax.
You can absolutely delay it to reduce the affective filter, though. Think about the psychological state of an adult beginner. The wall of anxiety, the fear of sounding foolish. That affective filter physically blocks language acquisition in the brain.
I mean, sure, anxiety is a factor.
It's the main factor for beginners. When you lead by saying, here is the most complicated, highly irregular verb in English, memorize its morphology and its conceptual deviations from your native tongue, you spike their anxiety. But when you teach them by chunks, combinations of words frequently used by natives stored as a single lexical unit, you give them immediate agency. They don't have to conjugate, they just retrieve the file and speak.
That retrieval is entirely brittle, though. Look, vocabulary is the flesh, but the verb to be is the skeleton system. Without the structural skeleton, those memorized chunks just collapse into a pile on the floor.
That's a bit traumatic.
But it's true. Let's look at the generative capacity of language. The curriculum highlights how the verb to be operates through inversion for questions and negatives like are you or I am not. If a learner only memorizes the chunk "I'm from Brazil," how will they ever organically generate the question, "Is she from Panama?"
They just retrieve a different chunk.
But working memory has strict limits. You cannot simply memorize every single permutation of a question as a discrete, isolated file. How old are you? How old is he? How old are they?
They don't memorize every permutation on day one, obviously.
Infinite sentences. Relying only on chunks is like dropping a prefabricated house onto an empty lot.
I actually love that analogy.
Wait, let me finish. Yes, it's incredibly quick to set up, but the owner can never modify it. They are trapped in the exact phrases they memorized.
See, your prefabricated house analogy plays right into my hands. When you need shelter immediately, a prefab house saves your life. You can build an addition later, but on day one, you need a roof.
Okay, but
Consider what happens in working memory when a beginner tries to speak using your architectural blueprint. They want to ask a simple question. First, they must access the pronoun. Second, they have to run a mental query for the correct morphological form of to be. Third, they have to execute the syntactic rule to invert the subject and the verb.
It becomes automatic with practice.
But by the time their prefrontal cortex has engineered the sentence, "How old are you?" the barista has already moved on to the next customer. The conversational moment is totally dead.
So the solution is just to parrot phrases without actually understanding them?
The solution is automaticity. Chunks store that entire phrase in the phonological loop as a single item. It's an automatic retrieval. They just say it. And we see this modeled beautifully in the curriculum's practical guide, the Guia Practico for international countries.
Ah, yes, the practical dialogues.
Exactly. Let's look at the dialogues they provide. We have a role-playing scenario where Joanna from Brazil meets Mary from Panama at an exchange program. The methodology strongly advises practicing these scenarios via out-loud role-playing.
I know the dialogue well.
Right, and they do it to train the muscle memory of the mouth, prioritizing the correct pronunciation of the countries and nationalities over internal grammatical mapping. When Joanna says, "Hi, my name is Joanna. What is your name?" and Mary replies, "I'm from Panama," they are engaging in a fluid social rhythm.
Yes, but
The intonation, the stress syllables in the word Panama, that is what makes the interaction successful. If they are hyperfixated on the mechanics of to be, they speak mechanically, sounding like a textbook reading application.
wait, hold on. Let's look under the hood of that exact phrase you just quoted. My name is Joanna. I am from Panama. What is the mechanism driving every single functional sentence in that authentic dialogue?
They are introductions.
It relies entirely on the verb to be. It is the inescapable engine of the interaction. You're praising the vehicle while completely ignoring the transmission.
I'm not ignoring it. I'm just saying the driver doesn't need to be a mechanic to drive the car.
But they do need to know how to use the steering wheel. Furthermore, you mentioned sounding natural and focusing on pronunciation. To sound natural in spoken English, the text emphasizes using contractions. I'm, you're, he's, there. You are presenting these as just more chunks, but contractions are fundamentally morphological manipulations of the verb to be.
Honestly, to a beginner, I'm is just a sound. It's a single syllable.
And that is exactly where the structural breakdown occurs. You cannot understand what "I'm" functionally does unless you understand that it is a fusion of the pronoun I and the verb am. If you teach a student that "I'm" is just an arbitrary phonetic sound meaning me, they inevitably start making bizarre structural errors.
Like what?
They try to contract questions incorrectly. They'll try to say, "Am I?" because they don't understand the syntactic constraints of the contraction. The grammar dictates the pronunciation. By understanding the mechanics of how the verb to be contracts, the student achieves that natural pronunciation you are advocating for, but they do it with a resilient structural foundation.
I fundamentally disagree that a beginner needs the morphological history of a contraction to pronounce it correctly. Think about it. Children learn their native language in chunks long before they possess any conscious understanding of syntax.
We are talking about adults, though.
But adults can leverage this exact same cognitive mechanism. By absorbing chunks and role-playing those introductions, they build a massive mental database of correctly formed sentences. Eventually, the brain's natural pattern recognition software kicks in, and they deduce the grammatical rules of the verb to be organically.
But adults are not children. The critical period hypothesis in linguistics suggests that an adult's brain simply does not acquire syntax implicitly the way a toddler's does. An adult's brain requires explicit pattern identification.
No, they require explicit vocabulary. Let's pivot to the immense lexical nuance required just to state one's origin. The Guia Practical provides extensive lists differentiating countries and nationalities. This is a massive phonetic and lexical load for a beginner.
It is a lot of vocabulary, yes.
Exactly. Switzerland versus Swiss, Germany versus German, Japan versus Japanese. Look at the varying suffixes. You have ion, man, ease.
Well, the morphology of English suffixes is notoriously complex, which I think only reinforces the need for structural anchors.
Navigating that system is a pure lexical challenge, though. The nuance of knowing whether to say I am from Germany, using the country noun, versus I am German, using the nationality adjective, demands intense vocabulary acquisition.
True.
A focus of a beginner's energy must be on acquiring these words and their specific phonetic stress. If we drain their working memory capacity by endlessly drilling the inversions of the verb to be, they might have a perfectly constructed empty syntax tree, but they won't have the actual vocabulary to tell you where they are from. Practicing the pronunciation of I am from Switzerland versus I am Swiss in a role play is what actually prepares them for the real world.
Look, I certainly acknowledge that a skeleton without flesh is just as useless as flesh without a skeleton. Vocabulary is vital. But without the verb to be acting as a gravitational anchor, all of that rich country and nationality vocabulary just floats away into ambiguity.
How so?
Look at the underlying logic of your own example. I am from Germany versus I am German. In many other languages, the distinction between origin and identity uses completely different verbs.
Right. Ser for identity, estar for location or temporary states.
Precisely. And the English verb to be ruthlessly absorbs both. The phrase, I am a student, or I am from Brazil, relies entirely on the copular nature of the verb to establish reality. The grammar provides the necessary container for the vocabulary to make any sense at all. Without the verb, the words Germany and German are just isolated data points. The verb to be is what assigns them relational meaning.
But in real-world pragmatics, the context assigns the meaning, not the grammar table. When Joanna meets Mary at the exchange program, the physical and social context is already established. They are two humans trying to connect. If Joanna simply smiles, points to herself, and says Brazil, communication has successfully occurred.
Pointing and grunting is not language acquisition.
It is the first step of social connection, which lowers the affective filter so acquisition can occur. Obviously, the pedagogical goal is progression to the full sentence, I am from Brazil, but the material supports prioritizing immersive pragmatic phrases over abstract rules.
I'm not against pragmatics, but
Take a standard phrase from the text, like, nice to meet you. Look at what English native speakers actually do there. They completely omit the subject and the verb to be. They drop the it is from the very front of the phrase. Natives speak in these truncated, highly pragmatic chunks constantly.
they do, yes.
So if a student is rigidly bound to their structural training, expecting a subject and a verb in every single utterance, they will be utterly paralyzed when a native speaker drops the verb to be entirely in casual conversation.
That is exactly why they need to know the rules, though. You cannot understand how a rule is bent or broken in casual pragmatics unless you know the rule exists in the first place.
I don't follow that logic.
When a native says nice to meet you, the it is syntactically implied. It is still structurally present in the deep structure of the speaker's mind. A student who understands the underlying logic of English syntax will recognize that omission as a casual contraction of thought. A student who only memorized the chunk will just think nice to meet you is a single unbreakable magic spell.
Well, if the magic spell works, why break it?
Because the moment they need to transition from a casual hallway greeting to formally writing a professional email, which, by the way, is a core progression outlined in the curriculum, that magic spell fails. They won't know how to construct the full, proper sentence because they never learned the architecture.
They can learn the architecture later when they actually need it for an email.
True confidence doesn't come from reciting a script. It comes from understanding the system. When I explain to a beginner why literal translation from their native tongue fails, when I give them the linguistic why behind the structure, I am respecting their adult intellect. That structural insight provides a much deeper, more resilient confidence than simply parroting a chunk.
I would counter that true confidence comes from the successful real-world application of the language. When that adult learner walks into a cafe, successfully deploys a memorized chunk, and gets their coffee without the barista switching to Spanish out of pity, that victory is profound.
It's a nice feeling, sure.
That victory is what keeps them coming back for lesson 2. If you front-load the syllabus with the abstract copular functions of an irregular verb, you risk driving them out of the classroom before they ever get to experience the joy of communication.
Well, we have clearly illuminated the core friction here. Through this analysis, my position remains that the mechanics of the verb to be provide the necessary blueprint for generative language. Without understanding its specific suppletive forms, its absorption of both ser y estar, and its structural role in inversions and contractions, a beginner is simply memorizing lines in a play without knowing how the words relate to one another. Structural grammar is the light switch that makes the entire room visible.
And my position remains that lexical chunks, role-play dialogues, and mastering the demanding phonetic vocabulary of international countries provide the immediate tools for survival. By focusing on authentic interaction and bypassing the paralyzing cognitive load of syntax, we lower the anxiety barrier. The flashlight allows the learner to navigate the room and connect with others on day 1, which is ultimately the whole purpose of language.
Yet, looking at the methodology as a whole, it's clear neither of us believes in simply throwing a dictionary at a student. I think we find absolute convergence on the danger of L1 literal translation.
Oh, on that, there is no debate whatsoever.
The neurological instinct to map one's native syntax directly onto English vocabulary, like substituting have for am when expressing age, is a fundamental barrier to acquisition. Understanding English on its own distinct terms is non-negotiable.
I agree entirely. The learner must function within the internal logic of English rather than trying to speak Spanish or Portuguese using English words. And realistically, a robust pedagogy for adult beginners likely moves fluidly between these two philosophies.
Absolutely.
A student can leverage role play to build immediate conversational confidence and train their pronunciation while systematically analyzing the structural syntax of to be to understand the mechanics behind their successes.
The interplay between structure and pragmatic use is ultimately where true fluency resides. There is naturally much more to dissect in the science of second language acquisition, from the nuances of the present continuous tense to the complexities of professional discourse. But we will leave it to our listeners to evaluate which pedagogical approach carries the most weight. When you step into that dark room of a new language for the very first time, do you wire the lights or do you grab the flashlight?